Hello everybody, welcome to Learn It. So we're going to move forward with chapter number 2 that talks about the Vedic age. So before starting, one thing is for sure, we'll have to understand the chronology. Because in history, if we understand the chronology, half the battle is won there. Rather, let me put it this way, 3/4 the battle is won there if you know the chronology. So there's a very distinct chronology, there are very distinct dates that we associate with the Vedic age. That to be of 1600 BC to 600 BC. When we talk about the Vedic age, it's divided into two parts, the early Vedic period, the later Vedic period. We'll see why do we have these classifications. There has to be something different with early Vedic period and later Vedic period. That is why we classify them into two very distinct periods. When we talk about the early Vedic period, we associate a timeline of 1600 BC to 1000 BC with that of EVP, early Vedic period. The later Vedic period has a period of 1000 BC to 600 BC. We'll understand why do we have these classifications. See, one thing is for sure. If this one large chunk is divided into two segments, there has to be a period of classification, a period of distinction. कुछ एक line तो होगी why we are dividing early Vedic period, we're separating early Vedic period from the later Vedic period. We'll learn why. When we talk about the early Vedic period, we've got one direct source. We've got multiple indirect sources that talks about the early Vedic period. We draw classifications as well. We draw certain comparisons, some certain similarities from different sources. But one source directly talks about the early Vedic period, and that source happens to be our Rigveda. When we talk about the later Vedic period, we've got multiple sources that directly or indirectly talks about the later Vedic period. Historians have very carefully given one date, one exact timeline to be associated with Rigveda, and that happens to be 1500 BC. So whenever we talk about the Rigveda, we associate 1500 BC with Rigveda. Mind it, the Vedic age begins from 1600 BC, but the Rigveda has been associated 1500 BCE say. Moving forward, when we talk about Rigveda or the Vedic culture, one thing is for sure, we often hear the term Aryan. What does this term mean? So Aryan means a speech community. Zahir si baat hai, if you are speaking something, you have to speak a language. Now, they spoke the Indo-European language. You don't have to confuse the term Aryans with Arya. Arya means a superior and noble man. Aryan means a speech community. The term Arya has been mentioned in the Rigveda precisely 63 times. Now, when we talk about the Aryans, where did they come from? They came from the Central Asian region. Now, one thing is for sure, they were nomads, pastoral community. Central Asia happens to be a dry and arid region. So they had to move, right? They were looking for food, so they had to move. They were pastoral communities as well. They moved with their cattle. And when we talk about them being pastoral community, you'll have to understand one thing, that their cattle was sacred to them. So they moved with their cattle. They were nomads. They moved from one place to the other because obviously Central Asian region is very dry, very arid. You have very limited resources there. So you move out from that region. You sprout out. You look for different opportunities, resources. So you'll have to move out from that region. So there's going to be outward migration from this specific region. Aryans were warriors. They lived in groups. And they fought amongst themselves also. They lived in groups, but they fought amongst themselves. What did they fight for? They fought for supremacy. Who is going to rule the land? Who is going to be supreme? Who is supreme amongst us? Let's see. Let's fight together and let's see who's supreme. Who's going to rule the land? They entered India with horses and iron. Remember, IVC people did not know about horses and iron. It was the Aryans who introduced us to horses and iron. Now, a passing by information is, remember this in the later sections when I talk about the battle and everything, that Chanakya I'm so sorry. Chanakya mentioned the term Aryavarta, which means nothing but the land of the Aryans. And what are we talking about? Which land are we talking about? The land that they came and settled in. So typically North India happens to be Aryavarta, which is the land of the Aryans. Now see, when we talk about Aryans being a speech community, they spoke the Indo-European language. They must have had some impact over language, no? Wherever they must have gone, they must have taken with themselves this language, and eventually this language must have evolved also over the period. So we see, we're moving to our next section, that is, how did the languages evolve? And to answer this question, we'll have to look at things very carefully. Let's say for simplification purposes, we know that the Aryans' origin was the Central Asian region. Now for simplified purposes, let's say there are 3 groups. Aryan lived in groups, right? So for simplification purposes, we're saying that we're taking into consideration 3 groups of Aryan. 1, 2 and 3. Let's say group number 1 comes and settles in India. Now they were nomads, right? So they had to settle somewhere. They were wanderers. They were searching for resources, food materials, etc., etc. So now they came to India. They came to IVC, northern parts of the country, and they settled there. Now when we talk about group number 2, they moved further westwards. Let's say they settled in parts of Iran, Iraq and Syria, which was erstwhile Mesopotamian civilization. When we talk about group number 3, they went further westward, crossed the Aegean Sea, the Alps, and then landed in Germany. So this was group number 3. One thing is for sure, group number 1, group number 2, group number 3, organically they spoke the Indo-European language, correct? When they came and settled in India, let's say we're talking about group number 1 here. When group number 1 came and settled in India, let's say IVC, this Indo-European became evolved into Sanskrit. When we talk about group number 2, the group that settled in parts of Iran, present Iran, Iraq, Syria, the Indo-European that group number 2 spoke evolved and became Persian. When we talk about group number 3 here, so the group number 3 originally spoke the Indo-European language. This Indo-European language, when reached parts of Germany and had evolved, became Latin. So you'll have to understand one thing very carefully, be it Sanskrit, be it Persian, or be it Latin. The mother language happens to be that of, yes, Indo-European. Because organically, originally, when we talk about group number 1, group number 2 and group number 3, they spoke the Indo-European language, which furthermore evolved into Sanskrit, Persian and Latin respectively. Now let's move on to the other section. We'll now zoom into the history of group number 1. So when we talk about group number 1, this is for simplification purpose, but our story revolves around group number 1 now. So we know that Aryans came and settled somewhere. They had to settle somewhere, right? We call it the Sapta Sindhu region. What is Sapta Sindhu region? It is nothing but land of 7 rivers. Sapt is nothing but 7. So what were these 7 rivers? Indus, which was called Sindhu, Ravi, called Parushani, Satluj, called the Shatudri, Chenab, Asikni, Vyas, Vipal, Jhelum, Vitasta, Ghagar, Saraswati. So these were the 7 rivers and these are their Rigvedic names. So Indus was called Sindhu, Ravi was called Parushani, so on and so forth. These were the 7 rivers. So the Aryans came, we're talking about group number 1, they came and they settled at the Sapta Sindhu region. Upon their arrival, they met two certain groups. They were dasas and dasyos. When we talk about dasas, who were the dasas? We know one thing for sure, that the Aryans have always been nomads. So even before the Rigvedic Aryans came, let's say even before group number 1 came and settled on the banks of the river Sapta Sindhu, even before them some Aryans must have entered India. So we are calling the Aryans that came before the Rigvedic Aryans to be called dasas. So technically these dasas were nothing but pre-Aryans, we can say. And dasyus, they gave the term to Harappans, or we can also call them non-Aryans. So the Rigvedic Aryans, group number 1, when they came to India, they met two groups of people, the dasas, who were pre-Aryans, and the dasyos. They fought a battle with them because Aryans per se have always fought for supremacy, right? When they see somebody else on a piece of land which they want to claim theirs, they'll have a fight. Upon their arrival, they fought a battle with these two groups of people. And this was at Harappa. The battle took place at Harappa. They defeated and killed them. Not all of them. The dasas were not killed. The dasas were enslaved. Kitna bhi ho, the dasas are Aryans, no? So they won't kill their own blood. With respect to dasyus, what happened was, some of them were killed in the battle, some of them were enslaved, some of them ran away to southern parts of the country. So this was the battle summary, overview rather. Now we're going to look at what exactly happened. So it's called the Battle of Dasrajana. What is Dasrajana? 10 kings. Das means 10. Rajana means Raj, Rajana, king, his throne. So Das Rajana, Battle of Dasrajana, 10 kings. Now what happened was, let's say we're again talking about group number 1 for simplification purposes. Let's say this group number 1 is King Sudas and his Bharata clan. Upon arrival, he met two different groups of people. One happened to be dasas, the other one happened to be dasyus. So then it is Dasrajana, right? So there were 5 dasas, 5 dasyus along with their clans. King Sudas and Bharata clan was supported by sage Vashishta. Dasrajana, when we talk about the 10 kings, they were supported by sage Vishwamitra. Now what happened is, we know King Sudas emerged victorious. So after the battle, King Sudas emerged as powerful and the Bharata clan established their supremacy, because at the end of the day, you'll have to realize they were fighting for supremacy, right? Who's going to rule the land? So King Sudas defeated the Dasrajana and emerged victorious. One very interesting thing is that of the defeated tribes, Puru was the most important. Bharata clan, what happened is, they subsequently joined hands with the Purus to form a new ruling party called the Kurus. And Kurus combined with Panchals. Panchals are nothing but another tribe, you may call them. Alright, another clan, another tribe. So when we mix Kurus and Panchals, so when Kurus joined hands with Panchals, they further established supremacy in the Indo-Gangetic plains. You remember I gave you all a term, Aryavata. Chalo jaldi now relate it to this Indo-Gangetic plains. So this was the entire story of how the battle was fought, what exactly happened, and this was a little overview. We dealt with it. We dealt with all the important points that were there. One thing is for sure, that there are no very specific questions asked from this very section, but if there is asked, we've covered all the important points. Now moving on to sources. So see, when we talk about sources, we know that Rigveda directly speaks about or directly talks about the Rig Vedic period. So when we say the Rigveda directly talks about the Rigvedic period, what do we exactly mean? Then the Rigveda mentions about the polity, the political setup. Rigveda specifically mentions about the society that must have prevailed, that prevailed during the times of early Vedic period. The Rigveda directly talks about, let's say, religion that must have prevailed. The Rigveda directly talks about the assemblies that were there, that took place during the early Vedic period. The Rigveda also talks about the economy. And one thing is for sure that the Rigveda directly talks about, it specifically mentions how is the polity like, how is the societal concept like, what did the Rigvedic period Aryans or the early Vedic period people talk about, or let's say believe about religion, how was the assemblies back then, what was the economic setup back then. So the Rigveda directly talks about, the political, socio-political, cultural aspects of the early Vedic period. When we talk about indirect sources, we've got three of them. So the historians, they tend to, let's say, correlate certain aspects of this culture with that culture. So what they've done is, we've got one indirect source that happens to be that of Zen Avesta. Now this is not the same Avesta that we talked about in the IVC lectures. This is the book of the Zoroastrians. Now when we talk about Zen Avesta, historians draw correlations or similarities or differences pertaining to, let's say, mythology, rituals, culture, religious beliefs and practices, or let's say the literature, grammar. Now another indirect source happens to be Homer's Odyssey and Homer's Iliad. So this was it about the sources. Let's move on to the last section of this lecture. Okay, so this one is nothing but just an overview of what we're going to learn about in the coming lectures. We're done with this section. 2A was this lecture. Now in the upcoming lecture, we'll see, we already saw that there are two distinct periods, right? EVP and LVP. So when we'll do the lecture number 2B, what we're going to look at happens to be the societal concept, the polity, the economy, the religion, and very conveniently, when we look at societal concepts, we'll also dwell with assemblies. You'll understand what exactly is assemblies. All of this pertaining to the early Vedic period, all of these concepts pertaining to the later Vedic period. So we'll distinctly deal with the society, polity, economy, religion of the later Vedic period as well in lecture number 2C. That is it from our side. Thank you and have a very wonderful day. Thank you.